and so we'll have some. Okay, got it.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tales of the Yard Side, episode 9, by Dipalo Ventures and MP Consulting. My name is Monica Razan, and I'm your coordinator for today's episodes and a full-time analyst at Dipalo Ventures. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that if you have any questions throughout the season or session, feel free to post them in the chat section for those joining us on Zoom. And for those joining on us YouTube Live, please drop them down on the comment section. Let's warmly welcome our host, Rafiq Ahmed, the Managing Director of Dipalo Ventures, and our special guests, the co-founders of WasteWizer, Thomas Spechner and Jay Brenner. Rafiq, why don't we start with you? Can you give our audience a brief introduction and background on yourself and Dipalo Ventures? And Thomas and Jay, you can go next.
Thanks, Monica. Hey, welcome everyone. And for those joining our webcast, appreciate you guys getting up early or staying up late or wherever you are in the world. Welcome. It's always fun to have a few live people. If you've got questions for our guests, then please drop them into the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, you can do that as well. Monica will monitor it. So we usually spend about a good half hour, 35, 40 minutes with our guests. So today, just to give you a background on Dipalo, myself. So Dipalo Ventures is a hard tech fund out of Chicago in the US. And we are focused on really innovation that's breakthrough technologies at the intersection of physical and digital. We've got a portfolio of 13 companies. We're proud of all of them. WasteWizer is the most recent, and you'll hear more about what they do here in a second. But we've sort of looked at it as venture capital generally shies away from physical products. There's obviously a few firms that do it well, but for the large extent, for every $15 going into software, there's $1 that goes into hard tech. And so we are very hands-on. We provide design and engineering support. We have a residency, which is an audit of where a company is with their product development and generally how they're finishing their product development cycle and where we can be helpful. We're able to do that with our partners at MPC. And secondly, it's always good to have venture capital in your cap table that is aware of the challenges of hard tech product development. Generally, that's what our founders always say. So whether we are helpful with we don't write large checks, we write smaller checks, but we're helpful because we know what it takes to build stuff. My background is from Motorola and many, many decades now, unfortunately, not just years, but decades of building stuff. So welcome, Jay and Thomas. Why don't you guys jump in and give a little intro to yourselves and WasteWizer?
Sure. So my background has been in the scrap and waste business. I grew up in a family business that was 97 years old before it got sold. Eventually working myself up to the president and CEO, and the company got sold for over $120 million. So that made all the family members happy. And so, that's from there. There was what to do next. And WasteWizer was a need that I saw and others saw in solving a problem of how to better manage and transport scrap, waste, recyclables, any products.
Yeah, and so for myself, I do not have decades of experience in waste and recycling, but have learned a lot over the last few years doing this venture after I met Jay and a mutual friend of ours, actually the last year of my PhD at Georgia Tech. And so I did my PhD in mechanical engineering. And when I saw there's a specific set of data that Jay had with some of the collections that he did in the waste services industry. And it came back that this kind of pickup schedule was off 75% of the time, right? So when you're collecting one of these really large bins that you might find behind a large grocery store, or specifically behind big manufacturing type units and type facilities, these bins were off most of the time. And so digging into that, we had some classes at Georgia Tech that says, okay, here's how you dig deeper. These are some of the types of questions that you ask to figure out, hey, where's the problem in this space? And the answers that came back were just so enthralling, like, oh, wow. So you know this is a problem, but you're relying on people to call you or to use a schedule in order to try and fix this logistics issue. Well, why don't you use sensors? There's a lot of different sensors available out there in the world. Oh, well, because the type of sensors that you need are for weight, and weight sensors don't work in this industry. Oh, that's really interesting. As an engineer, why do weight sensors not work? And then it's because of the fundamental physics that's wrong. And so go back and recruited a couple people that were friends in the community here at Georgia Tech, where we set about solving this really tough physics type problem that also had a large economic incentive behind it. And that's really where pairing those two, the industry side with the technology side, is really what formed WasteWizer.
How long ago was that, guys?
Yeah, so met him about 3 years ago. So perspective-wise, I defended my thesis the first week of COVID happening. And so that crazy week where everyone got shut down and it goes from things being in person to not, was really the turning point of, okay, well, the world's shut down right now, might as well try and go do this crazy startup idea and give it a shot until the world comes back to normal. And then once it did, we could continue to make traction.
So how big is your team? I'm going to probably let you guys talk a little bit about the early days and just like, is it just the two of you, or do you have more people?
So we have 4 full-time people right now, and then a plethora of different people where the strategy, and I think we read out of a book at some point, is try to do each step first and then get to the point of your incompetency and realize you need to bring people in, right? And so that's a kind of process that we've implemented. And so we've done that in different areas: software, hardware, tech, your guys being one example, more recently for the manufacturing side, for the marketing side, for the accounting type side, right? And so we've pulled different people in and had them stick around as well.
I think what's important too is, as a startup, don't expect that your role is ever going to be what you signed up for or what you got your degree in, because you have to do anything. And it's always funny to me that how uncomfortable the engineers side were in talking to customers, and now they love it. And that helps build cohesion to understand what the customer wants and needs.
Would love to hear more about the product journey, but you know what I'm going to first do is I'm going to share a screen from your deck.
Okay.
I guess I could have brought up your website, but this is what I had handy. Can you see that?
Absolutely. That looks like Tony there.
That looks like Tony. So just to give people a sense, what is going on? What's Tony doing? What is this product?
Sure. So his job is to haul that big blue bin. And by haul, I mean get in the truck, go pick up that container. And in this case, they are a scrap customer. And so what that container is filled with is, if you're trying to make like a door or something like that for a car, you're going to cut out the door, and the metal around it needs to go somewhere. And so it goes in one of these containers. And the goal of this company, and one that Jay's very familiar with, is to take these containers and the contents of metal, you box into a better form to be able to reuse that metal. And so the device right here, the yellow bar, is what we call a BinBar. It goes under a bin, it looks like a bar, that is actually able to weigh these large containers. And when we started the call, I talked about this weird physics problem. Well, that stems from the fact that the stuff that's in this container is up to 20 tons worth of material. And it gets dropped in like not very nicely. And so essentially, from a kind of force perspective, what happens is if you think of two rail cars smashing into each other, well, that's the same kind of forces that these bins exhibit. And typical load cells, like your bathroom scale, that might be the most familiar type, those types of sensors aren't able to withstand those big smashing events. So we actually have a couple patents inside this big bar that can withstand that smashing and can do it in a way that converts that smashing force into a weight value that Tony here can see, oh, I need to come pick this thing up today or tomorrow, not next week. And that's what it all boils down to, is that one big piece of information, which is weight data.
So why did you go with weight as opposed to, say, volume? Like, I want to see how much of this is filled up.
Sure thing. So this whole industry, the waste and recycling industries, runs on weight, because when you take this to the other end of Tony's route here, that container is going to be weighed on a scale, right? Because the contents inside that scrap metal is all based on a price per ton. And so Jay's very familiar with the metal markets. You can look up, it's all weight based. But at the point that you get to that scale, it's already too late to actually send Tony because he's already gotten there. And so instead of bringing the bin to a scale, we bring the scale to the bin.
So in terms of other startups and just alternative approaches, and some folks have raised money, quite a bit of money. There's computer vision inside these recycling bins. What about that technology? Why wouldn't actually be able to see the volume, or maybe even some combination of weight and volume, make more sense than your approach? Like what sort of convinces you that weight's the right way to go?
Yeah, that was exactly the first question a few years back that we were asking is, okay, if you stick a camera in this device and are trying to understand what the fill is by volume, how helpful is that for these types of containers? And there's an obvious remark of, hey, if you put a board over the camera, now it's completely full, and that's bad, right? But also this material can be very dense. And so that can that you're looking at right there, it's actually mostly full by volume about halfway, because by weight, it's more dense and needs to be hauled off. And that's actually dictated mostly by the truck you see there and the Department of Transportation, where you're going over a bridge or you're going on the road and your brakes need to work. And in order for your brakes to work on that truck, you need to be under a certain weight limit. How do you know that weight limit? Well, right now you're guessing. And that's something that can be dangerous and needs a lot of experience and a lot of very experienced drivers to actually tell, hey, I probably shouldn't go down the highway with this load, or nah, I could probably get away with it this time. And so we're taking away that uncertainty.
I think the other thing is look at it not just as being able to predict when to go pick up the container, because that's the data, some of the data we give, but also the operational efficiencies. So these are containers, but if you take a look at the container, and we're working on this product, it's a front loader container. That's the big one, the ones you see behind McDonald's and the fast food restaurants. Yeah. Well, would you rather go pick up 50 containers that are full, or would you rather go pick up 100 containers that are half full? Well, think about all the sustainability benefits, all the labor benefits, all the different, there's just tons of them that make a difference if you can make that truck full with half the amount of time. And in our data from the trash that we did, Thomas said 75% of the container pickups are inefficient.
So guys, I'm glad you brought up sustainability. As you know, being a hard tech fund, and in this day and age, to not think about climate would be foolish. And obviously we're super interested in the climate hard tech world. what does this do for the climate? I mean, it's not a direct play, perhaps, in terms of emission reduction, but what's the net impact of your innovation?
Sure thing. So I guess there's two main ways. One's direct, one's indirect. So the most direct is that truck that Tony's standing in front of is like a 3.5 to 5 mile per gallon truck. So every time that it's not having to take a load that's half empty or mostly empty, that is a lot of direct CO2 that's removed. And we estimate with our current kind of projections that could be about 100.
Yeah.
Reducing the trips, like just truly not having to move a truck as much, that adds up to around 110,000 pounds or 1,000 tons of CO2 that could be removed. Now that's a very small portion of the total emissions of like the US or especially the world. One thing that's even bigger is this whole dynamic of in waste and recycling in general, there's a big push to move from the majority of things that are being thrown out that could be recycled. And so that's actually a area where 7% of the total emissions of the US come from that missorting, if you will, of stuff that went to the landfill that should have been recycled. And now our product is actually providing the data that's able to do the tracking of where this stuff is going. And actually coming from and going, but mostly where it's coming from. So the waste generating entities. And if you look at the waste generators, most of that is not actually the municipal, so the kind of household trash, but it's really the industrial sites. So if you have an operation running 24/7 to produce a widget, well, the other stuff that comes out of the manufacturing process to make that widget is a lot of junk. And so we're monitoring mostly as our first market, the industrial sites that are either like this one shown here, producing excess scrap metal that can be repurposed into a new type of door or something like that. And then also excess nastiness, for using the technical term, aka the stuff that they want to reduce, those amounts of nastiness coming out of the plants. And with all the kind of goal of 95% renewables within the plant and things like that, our data is something that can hold these companies accountable to track how their waste generation is decreasing over time. And that's the part that we provide, is that data.
And the results for the BinBar are immediate. So, from my experience in the waste and the scrap industry, you usually don't bill till the end of the month, or you don't pay to the end of the month. So you're not giving the customer the data. If you're a waste hauler, you're not giving them to the end of the month. And if you're a scrap dealer, you're not paying to the end of the month.
Whereas your data is more real time. So
that's
a great benefit, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to clarify one thing, the 110,000 CO2 metric tons of CO2 reduction is across your footprint. It's not per truck, obviously. I mean,
no. Per truck is 3.5 mile per gallon. So you can do the math of the very minimal, but you drive colloquially down behind one of these trucks and it's nasty feeling, right? That's more of a the number recorded is across the fleets.
So I don't know if people know what the weight or the capacity of these these bins are. What is that?
Yeah, so the capacity is dictated by the 88,000 ton, 88,000 pound limit of that truck going down the road. So that's the entirety of that truck. You have to count for how much it weighs, how much Tony's eaten that day, all that side that ends up going into can this load be carried across the bridge? Can it be?
But typically, like just the waste itself.
Yep. So the waste itself then ends up being on the order of 15 to 20 tons of stuff in that container, and that's the kind of Goldilocks zone that we're aiming for.
There'll be a trivia quiz at the end of this podcast.
I'm throwing out lots of numbers. I'm sorry, that's kind of similar to what we talk in our
So,
world.
so Jay, would love to hear from you. Like, so who are your customers, and how do you, like, you know, people think of the waste and recycling industry, and they think of, you know, Tony Soprano, and characters like that. What's it like really, and how does a young startup sort of cut through that market and make sales? You need a guy like
that
Jay
is the hard.
or, yeah, what's the magic?
Yeah, that is the hardest part, is finding the right person at the company. And yeah, it's a pretty big effort. You know, you have to find who's in charge of sustainability, who's in charge of operations. And then, you know, it's a sales cycle.
I mean, is
where you
anybody
go-
in charge of sustainability at a waste company at this point in time?
Yeah, there are people that are in charge of sustainability.
Okay.
But then they have to, you know, you have the point of getting to understand that everything that you do has to have an income related part to it. They're not, I mean, it's bad to say, but they're not going to do it just because it's good for the environment. You have to make them understand what's the monetary effect on.
So what is the business model you guys are trying out? If you can speak to it.
Sure thing. So
How do you see it evolving, really?
yeah, so the big thing is that it's all based on the value that these customers receive, right? You got to start with what value can customers receive by knowing this weight data. And so each pickup that happens that shouldn't have happened is a net savings for that customer. This one that you're seeing there is around the order of $300 every time you pick up that can, right? That's what the kind of total cost is, depending on what location you're going to and all that. Too much detail for this conversation though. Others if you're dealing with really nasty stuff, it can be in the thousands of dollars to actually pick up those containers each time. And so our model is based off of a rental for the actual hardware, or you can pay up front depending on the capital versus operating budget of each company, plus a continuous monthly data fee for kind of like your cell phone. You buy a phone and then you have data that comes off of it. And then finally, the last aspect is, depending on the complexity of the business and the software packages that we're building and operating on, is a lump kind of subscription for the total package that you might expect. Like if you have Microsoft Word 365 or PowerPoint or SolidWorks or many of these other types of programs that actually will make sense of that data that you're receiving and tell you actionable things to do it all on. So it's a multiple revenue stream kind of model.
So as a kind of a HaaS or hardware as a service company, do you see where the bin itself, which I know you're pricing today, I mean, is that something you give away and it's all about the data and the service in the future? I mean, customers ask for that?
The goal is to get the hardware component as minimal as possible for the kind of ability to unlock the software side. And so that's actually something that's working with your all's group is important for that, is to take our 1 to 50 kind of price point now to make each BinBar kind of artisanally, aka we do them all by hand right now in this stage of our startup, to be able to convert that and greatly reduce the price there. And so our goal is to not really make much of a profit, kind of break even on the hardware, with a little bit of margin in order to create keep our hardware process going. But it is really the software side that is the majority and the really meats and potatoes of what our company does in order to actually make money. Because after all, the data is what customers need, and the hardware is a way to that data.
Yeah, with other enhancements that even from the customers, we've had requests for different types of data. I mean, if you think about this, and if you think about adding this to a routing software program or optimized routing software, that's a match for in the future for our product. Is now you got the weights, now you can make the driver's route more efficient.
And then there's
So
also.
I'm going to probably stop the screen share.
Sounds good.
I think people have a sense of what the product looks like. But speaking of product, and you brought this up a couple of times, so where are you? And maybe just walk the audience a little bit through how does one go about making something like a BinBar? Like, how long does it take? Like what do I need to do? And where are you in that process?
Yeah, great question. So to make a BinBar now, it takes 2 hours. To get to the point where it takes that time, it takes years. And so if you're not familiar with the kind of product cycle, it starts with this kind of innovation phase where that was actually while I was on a fellowship and was able to kind of spend 20% of time doing is this even feasible research, right? So that's the first step is, does the technology actually physics work out? And that was something that was initially questioned, where we have a different approach to weighing something that's based on a nonlinear reactive material. And so can we define that? First, took about a year of very part-time, 10 hours a week kind of in the lab studying. Then got to the point where, yeah, it seems like this is at least reasonable enough that we have a pathway to refine it. And then it took another year to work with customers directly, where Jay already had contacts in the industry that were not paying us at that point, but just having a trial out there and seeing just how they break it. And so the story for that, actually, we started with not this single BinBar, but actually the goal was to implement into each container our technology. And that's actually where we're going to eventually end, because the goal would be to have, instead of a dumb dumpster, you can buy a smart dumpster with our technology.
Built in.
But there's a lot of logistics to get there, because you first have to prove that this works, that the value's there. And honestly, not that great at welding. So going and flipping over a bin, cutting off the rollers, the big wheels of these things, attaching our technology, re-welding, accidentally touching the thing while it's way too hot and getting yelled at for learning how welding works, was something that kind of told us, hey, there's a pivot in our hardware that we did thankfully really early, and because of the resources that we had, we're able to figure out, okay, if we keep going down this path, it'll be not just years, but decades until we can actually get this thing out there logistically. So instead, we had a early advisor at the time. It's like, hey, let's self-contain this. So then we worked on revamping and doing a different form factor that ended up now being BinBar, brought that to some of the same customers and some of the partners here in Atlanta, and said, hey, this is where our first version is. Okay, well, it needs to have a replaceable battery rather than a plugged in. There's this thing needs to be changed, this thing needs to be changed, and kind of iterated on that for about a year. And then this past year, we actually got to the point where we were producing the close to the unit that you saw in that picture, where we have some of the painted stuff done. We have still very prototypey type materials for some of the electronics enclosures, but the main hardware is established. And at that point, it then became, okay, now let's prove out that the data side works and the value that you get. And so for the past few months, we've been putting these actually in the field at paying customers that are doing a trial basis. And so that is actually, hey, you're not willing yet, and we don't expect you to commit to a 5-year or 2-year or 10-year contract up front, because, well, we're a startup, right? It's a big risk to go that far out. So instead, let's get this on your site. Let's show that this data actually does work, that it's able to be able to save your operations like we claim. And then let's work on converting those contracts to new. Yep.
We could have a few customers that we've got to that long-term contract now. They like the product. They can see the value in it. It's not that we don't have them, but
so who are you actually piloting? I'm not naming customers, but where in the industry are you finding customers or traction? What makes
so two sides, and mostly it's where these bins are located are at a facility that is making something, right? So either they're making things that are out of metal, And so they're putting that metal in the bins that we're monitoring, or they're making something that produces a lot of junk. A lot of waste, yeah. And so the end customer and the people that care most about our device is whoever is paying for that stuff to get transported away. So in the case where the material is valuable, that's the actual scrap companies themselves. So the large haulers that will pay their people to go collect the bin and pay the generator of that scrap material for the pleasure of being able to remove that. Then on the other side, it's the waste generators who want to get rid of this really nasty stuff and will pay in order to reduce the number of times that they need someone to come pick up their container that way.
So that sounds like a lot of industrial and just like across all sorts of industries.
Very much so. Yeah, very industrial IoT.
Hopefully that bodes well for your investors. Speaking of which, so
a completely unbiased comment there.
yeah, I don't give investment advice on this webcast, but sometimes I do. So I'm curious, you talked a couple of times about working with us. I mean, we did this residency where MPC looked at our partners. MPC looked at your design for manufacturing. So what can you sort of say about the stage you're in, or kind of your experience there for other startups that maybe are looking at product development as well?
Sure thing. So I think that as entrepreneurs, we have developed skill sets, hopefully, that take something from 0 to 1. There's that famous book on that same exact title. I think it really hits the point of trying to figure out what the potential is to make the first one and see that first one really works. Where I think MPC and you guys have a lot of experience is taking, okay, well, you've shown that one works, or in our case, about a batch of 30 works. Now let's see if we can transform that into a larger scale. And there's steps between those two kind of paradigms where companies can fall out, right? Because there's things that you can do that could be very costly in the way that you design a tooling, or in the way that you did not account for this certification process that you're going to have to do here, but it's going to take X tens of thousands or $100,000s of dollars to get there. So you want to know right now what things to consider in the future. And for ourselves, we haven't done mass manufacturing before. You all have. And so the first step was identifying, are there any gaps in the actual hardware itself? And thankfully, we have a very solid technical team internally that there were not very many gaps in the actual product. And that was a great confirmation. But if there were pieces and holes, you want to know it right now.
What we found too is that in that gap time, we spent a lot of time understanding what we can do to improve the assembly of the unit. Because gosh, how many days did it take when we first started to assemble a unit? It was about a week.
Yeah, each device was a week to build. That was part of some of the product journey. And now we've gotten that down, but to go from a week to a day to a few hours to then hopefully in the end of this, it'd be a few minutes. Of course, that's separated a lots of minutes across the process, but that's details. But those steps, and in order to do that, you need to have a solid plan. And so what this kind of residency point in was to determine what that plan is and where the pitfalls that we need to avoid could be. And so one of the things I thought was extra important was not just the plan, but also the timing. And then working with the constraints that as a small startup we had of how to do each step of the timing. When's it most critical? What can we chunk out? And I think they did a great job of helping us decide that pathway.
Got it. So you've got a better roadmap and now on to sort of that DFM, or design for manufacturing. So I want to switch gears a little bit, and we're probably winding down on time. So you guys are we kind of invested in you in late fall, early winter. I remember where was I? I was in Dubai or
We were all
someplace.
over the place.
Traveling, getting back.
Yeah, we were going back and forth, documents, lawyers, whatnot. But we got it done. So you guys are in pre-seed stage. You may be going out. So yeah, just like generally fundraising 2023, the world is supposed to end. Now, so what's the landscape for folks starting out or people in the hard tech world as you try to, continue raising or get to your next round? What words of wisdom do you have?
So there's a lot of challenges, as I think you mentioned earlier. The 1 in 15 do the bet on hard tech, and the VC space in general. So finding the right people there that have the interest in the portfolio that supports that is the first step. Getting a lot of introductions through current networks is a great way to build trust and keep going around that kind of network. I will say though that there is a dry powder out there, right? There's, I guess for the term, there's still money that's able to be invested, but with the current climate, the challenge is harder. And with harder challenges, I think the big thing that we learned or was drilled into us in academia is if you have a hard physics problem, go back to the first fundamental principles. You're always going to have the energy equation. That's always true. You're always going to have these other true principles of math and science. And in the same way, there's true core principles in business. You have to have a customer that has a great interest in your product. They have to see real value, and you have to be able to deliver that value in a way that has the unit economics in a positive way that will kind of structure the backbone of everything else that's ancillary that goes along with building a great company.
Talk about raising money right now.
Yeah. Oh, and so that's what we're doing.
But actually, on that note, and I love how taking a finance problem of fundraising and breaking it back down into physics and engineering is why we love engineers. So that problem you describe of I need to solve for these things and tell that story. I mean, how are you doing? How are you tracking? What grade are you giving yourself as you how much of that and where at what point would you go back and raise again when you have 100% of that and everything's beautiful, or at what point you raise again?
Yeah. So I think the grading scale that is the hardest part is timing, and that's something where if you mention engineers, we're notoriously bad at underestimating the time it takes to do a thing, right? I think that's pretty common, or at least that's something for myself. And where that translates to in fundraising is ensuring you have a long enough runway. And that's something where we are now looking to kind of extend our current runway by doing this true seed round and positioning ourselves based on milestones rather than necessarily time, right? So the big milestone that we were setting for our very first kind of friends and family angel round was making a product. That was what we were raising to do to get some of the information for that. Then it was getting actual paying customers of any amount that want to at least try it to see external validation of this is worth my time. So that was our pre-seed type round. Now the big milestone that we're using that funds for is to convert and say, hey, these people aren't just wanting to try it, but they're wanting to continue to use this data. And now that we've been hitting that milestone is where we're now headed into the true seed round to say, hey, we've done this before. We want to do this more and more times. And here's the type of people that we go after. And look, this is the path that we have to success.
Fantastic. Well, I wish you all the success, and we'll be working and collaborating in both product as well as in fundraising as we go forward. So it's a tough market, but they say that good products will find funding and valuations will normalize. They got a little bit out of hand, perhaps in certain sectors, but we'd like to think in the unloved part of the market that is hard tech, that we were always prudent, both as investors and as founders. Well, not always perhaps, but for the most part, let's hope.
That's the goal.
Well, I'll give you guys just last words. Anything big coming up that you want folks to know about? So I'll hand it to you.
Sure thing. So two big asks. One being on the software engineering side to facilitate some of the customer requests that we're getting, and some of the ways that we want to strategically position ourselves to not just be facilitating what customers need now, but also all the other integrations that we could build our product with. Because once you're monitoring the weight data that's coming in, well, that has a price associated with it. You need to be able to track those pricing. And then there's kind of the fintech type potential to keep expanding vertically in this market. And so having people.
What's the ask? Is it you're looking to hire?
So looking to hire software engineer.
Okay.
And the second is for our seed round funding to make an introductions and to be able to connect us to people interested in having conversations with us.
Fantastic. Well, it's WasteWizer.com. It's DePauloventures.com.
With a Z.
Right there.
Z. And yeah, and our partners at MPC as well. Thanking them for the work that they've done so far with you guys. So I would just ask the audience to look at our YouTube channel. Monica, are you around? I think we are probably done, and unless there's any other questions that you want to toss in there, I think it's been great to introduce you to our audience. And
thank you.
There's a photo of the holiday card or something.
Yeah, we'll get that. Thank you for the wine. We took a picture of that from the trip.
Wine? What wine? Okay. All right.
Well, thank you so much. I'm here around. Ending on the note where, like Rafiq said, we hope this year is not really an end, and goes for all the positivity in whether it's for fundraising, whether it's on the HaaS side of venture capital or any other market. But thank you so much. I hope everyone, Thomas and Jay, you had a good conversation, and our audience also enjoyed the conversation. As always, tune on the third Wednesday of each month for new and exciting episodes and special guests like them. If you have any topics you would like us to, go over in future episode, please let us know by commenting in the comment section, and we will try our best to include them in our future episodes. We would like to thank Rafiq, our managing partner from WasteWizer, and our partners and supporter MPC for all the help throughout our making the tales as successful so far. It's been an air. So we hope to work on this as we go along. Once again, thank you so much, Thomas and Jay, for joining us today and giving some insights about the industry and all the fundraising and engineering ups and downs. Thank you to all the attendings who joined us, whether it's for Zoom or via Cube Live. We will see you in our next session. Have an amazing day.
Thank you so much.